The eternal struggle between good and evil, a detailed analysis of Genesis 3 verses 1 to 7. The story of Adam and Eve's fall, described in the 3rd chapter of the book of Genesis, Genesis 3 verses 1 to 7, is one of the most significant biblical parables that reveals the nature of human sin, the consequences of deviating from God's will, and the eternal struggle between good and evil. This episode not only explains the origin of evil in the world but also serves as a metaphor for understanding the spiritual battles that every person faces. Let us carefully analyze this text and its meaning. Context of the narrative. At the beginning of the book of Genesis, God creates the world and humanity in His own image and likeness. He places the first man, Adam, in the Garden of Eden, a place of perfection, harmony, and joy. God gives Adam everything necessary for life, along with the freedom to choose, while forbidding him to eat from only one tree, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. This prohibition symbolizes a boundary that humans must respect to maintain their unity with the Creator. However, already in the 3rd chapter, the story shows how evil enters this perfect world through the tempter, the serpent, which becomes an agent of deception and temptation. This event forms the basis of what Christian theology calls the fall. Detailed text analysis. 1. The serpent as the embodiment of evil. The first character in this story is the serpent, which is described as more crafty than any of the wild animals the Lord God had made. This indicates that evil often disguises itself as innocence or manifests itself through cunning. The serpent is not just an animal, it is a symbolic representation of Satan, who seeks to destroy the relationship between humanity and God. The serpent begins a dialogue with Eve, asking, "Did God really say, 'You must not eat from any tree in the garden'?" This question is designed to sow doubt about God's words. The tempter wants to make Eve reconsider her trust in the Creator and question His wisdom. Already here, we see how evil operates through manipulation and distortion of the truth. 2. Eve's response, the first signs of weakness. Eve responds to the serpent by repeating God's words but introduces an inaccuracy. She says, "We may eat fruit from the trees in the garden, but God did say, 'You must not eat fruit from the tree that is in the middle of the garden, and you must not touch it.'" However, God never said anything about not touching the fruit of the forbidden tree. This small alteration in God's words shows how easily humans can begin to distort the truth when influenced. 3. Lies and deception. The serpent continues his cunning actions, directly contradicting God's words, "You will not certainly die. For God knows that when you eat from it your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." Here, evil manifests itself through outright lies. The serpent promises Eve knowledge, power, and equality with God, but in reality, these promises lead to destruction. Notice that the serpent does not force Eve to sin, he merely nudges her to make a choice that contradicts God's will. 4. Eve and Adam's decision. Eve sees that the fruit of the tree was good for food and pleasing to the eye, and also desirable for gaining wisdom. This description highlights 3 primary ways in which evil attracts humans. Physical pleasure, good for food. Aesthetic admiration, pleasing to the eye. Desire for power and knowledge, desirable for gaining wisdom. Eve takes the fruit, eats it, and gives it to Adam. Adam, witnessing everything, agrees to break God's commandment. This act of disobedience becomes the point of no return, after which sin enters the world. 5. Consequences of the fall. After Adam and Eve ate the fruit, they immediately realized their nakedness and hid from God. This symbolizes the loss of innocence, the rupture of their relationship with God, and the beginning of suffering. Sin not only destroys the harmony between humanity and the Creator but also leads to the following consequences. Division between people, Adam blames Eve. The curse on the ground. The appearance of diseases, hardships, and death. The necessity of labor for survival. The eternal struggle between good and evil. 1. God as the source of good. God is the absolute embodiment of good. He created the world perfect, without evil or suffering. His commandments are aimed at humanity's well-being, and following them brings harmony and joy. Good is living in accordance with the divine plan, being faithful to his laws, and loving him. 2. Evil as the antithesis of good. Evil is represented in the form of the serpent, which uses deception, lies, and manipulation to distance humanity from God. It disguises itself as good, promising knowledge, power, or pleasures, but in reality, it leads to destruction. Evil always offers an alternative to God's plan, luring people with false freedom and illusory benefits. 3. Freedom of choice. Humans are endowed with free will, which makes them responsible for their actions. God gave humanity the ability to choose between good and evil. Adam and Eve chose the path of disobedience, leading to the fall. Since then, every person faces the same choice, to follow God or succumb to temptation. 4. Hope for restoration. Despite the fall, God did not abandon humanity. In Genesis 3 verse 15, there is already a hint of future redemption through the seed of the woman, which will crush the serpent. This prophecy points to the coming of Jesus Christ, who will ultimately conquer evil. Thus, the story of the fall does not end in hopelessness but opens the way to salvation. Relevance for modern humanity. The story of Adam and Eve remains relevant today, as it reminds us of the importance of spiritual vigilance and discernment between good and evil. The modern world is full of temptations that, like the serpent, may seem attractive but ultimately lead to destruction. Here are several key lessons we can draw from this text. 1. Trust in God. We must trust God and His words, even if they seem unclear or restrictive to us. Doubting God often becomes the first step toward sin. 2. Vigilance against temptation. The tempter will always try to convince us that sin is the path to greater freedom or success. However, it is important to remember that sin always has destructive consequences. 3. The value of free will. God has given us the freedom to choose, but this freedom carries responsibility. Every choice we make has consequences, and we must be prepared for them. 4. Hope for redemption. Despite our mistakes and sins, God always provides a way to reconciliation. Through Jesus Christ, we can receive forgiveness and new life. Conclusion. The story of the fall in Genesis 3 verses 1 to 7 is not just a tale about the origin of evil but also a profound reflection of the eternal struggle between good and evil. This text calls us to remember our responsibility before God, the need to discern truth from falsehood, and the hope of redemption through Jesus Christ, who will ultimately conquer evil. The story of Adam and Eve symbolizes the eternal struggle between good and evil, where good is following God, and evil is deviating from His path through deception and sin. This text teaches us trust, vigilance, and hope for salvation.